I don't even know the difference between a good and a bad idea anymore. Sometimes I think an idea is amazing and it'll lead you astray, but it'll take you somewhere you were probably supposed to go anyway.
In 2008, as the financial crisis was rippling through the economy, an aspiring chef and restaurateur had an idea. Mario Carbone had sailed through culinary school in some of the best kitchens in New York City, but along the way felt something was missing. A dining experience that married the elegant culinary offerings of his schooling with the family-style Italian-American ambiance of his childhood in Queens, New York. So he and fellow chef Rich Teresi scraped together all the money they could and opened a tiny eatery named after Rich in Little Italy. Now, a little over a decade later, they own more restaurants than they had seats in that first venture. With renowned dining establishments scattered across the globe, Carbone, his partners, and their company, Major Food Group, are a certified dynasty. And it all started with one idea. What was the role that food played in the culture of your family?
It was the meeting place, the place where you go at the end of the day to have, dinner and talk about the day. My first babysitters were my grandparents, and they were always in the kitchen. So if I was with them, I was there. And as I got older, they started throwing you little, tasks to do and help out.
Were your parents into cooking at all?
No, my mom cooked really as a means to feed the family. My dad, did the barbecue dad thing in the backyard. The real enthusiasm was from both sets of grandparents and the origins of that and being exposed to that.
How did your parents' professional lives inform your ambitions?
I saw them work incredibly hard. My dad worked basically 7 days a week for as long as I can remember. He had his regular job at the Brooklyn Union Gas Company, and then he had a side hustle landscaping company with my uncle on the weekends. And when me and my cousin were old enough, we joined that hustle, and we'd jump in the back of the truck and we'd do landscaping and we'd work all weekend. And my mom was a secretary, so I think just work ethic through osmosis of seeing it, and still to this day when I'm on the phone with my dad, he doesn't say goodbye, he says go to work. That's just a thing that he's like, all right, son. He's like, all right, kid, I'll see you later. All right, go to work.
You started working in the kitchen at 14, 15 years old.
Yeah, the Crab Shack.
Crab Shack, yes. Yeah. Northern Blvd.
Exactly.
How did you get that job and why?
We knew someone there. It was Diana, my sister's boyfriend at the time, and that was the inn. Somehow that became my first job, and what they were serving and how they were serving it was nothing. This was like a pro kitchen.
Were you doing this during school or?
Yeah, I was doing after school and on weekends. I don't think I really told anybody for a while, and I think a lot of that was my uncertainty because I wasn't sure if I was actually gonna do this or it was just a little hobby. But in the back of my mind, I was testing myself because I thought that maybe this was a path for me, because by that point of high school, it was becoming pretty evident that scholastics wasn't my route, and there was gonna need to be some sort of vocation involved in my future here if I was gonna earn a living. So I thought in the back of my mind, I'll try this out. I've always liked restaurants and food, and I always grew up kind of messing around with it at home.
Once you sort of were both feet in, how did you feel about it?
It was the exposure to the craziness that is a restaurant that I actually loved as well. That sort of the way Bourdain explains it, sort of craziness of it, that cult that you have to love also. I worked there and a bunch of other restaurants in the neighborhood. I worked at a country club one summer. I did a bunch of odd food jobs. Then when I got to graduation, really my two paths were community college or actually try this. I was lucky enough to have clarity of thought in that moment to say, the pursuit of this is going to lead to nothing but mediocrity. The pursuit of this is a great unknown and kind of a starting place. You can start over here and from day one, reapply yourself to this, what I looked at as a vocation. This is a thing that I'm gonna learn how to do with my hands that I'll always know how to do and I'll always be able to make a living. And put real effort, maybe effort that you didn't put into this or you never put into this, and challenge yourself in this next phase of your life to go after this. You're starting at the same place everyone else will start at.
Did your parents support this decision?
They did. I know and I remember fear in them, the idea that you're not going to get a real diploma out of anything you're doing right now. So that didn't feel great, but I pursued on. I'm happy that I went to culinary school, but I do not think it's necessary. What we do is that sort of 10,000 hour thing. There's really no way to speed it up. There are no savants out there, and it's a long path. But I believe that path doesn't need to begin with a school. I think it could easily be the school of Restaurant Danielle on 65th Street. That can easily be where your formal education starts. Just go somewhere where you're learning good foundation. Because if you're learning good foundation, good technique, you can apply it to anything.
What was the most important thing you feel like you got out of that experience?
I think meeting Rich the first day of orientation was the single best thing to come out of school. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that it was such a significant moment of my life. I met my professional life partner, right? Everything else that happened there just sort of paled in comparison to what became this amazing moment. At the time we didn't know, right? It would take 10 plus years for that to grow into this thing that we got to here. Over time, that was what that relationship blossomed into.
Did you have a sense as you were getting out of school and starting your internships and stuff, what your ultimate goal was?
My only goal was to be great. I wanted to be known as one of the great chefs, and I only cared about being known as one of the great chefs of New York City. As I started to meet and work with the best chefs, some of the best chefs in the history of food in New York, all I wanted to become as I got to sort of my mid-20s was anywhere near their colleague.
Who were the people you were looking up to at that point?
Mario Batali was one of my mentors. I got to work for Northern Blvd, but then just meeting and going to restaurants, while I was still living at home, because I was so young, I would save up all my money and I would just take myself to a 4-star restaurant and just use it all, just to see what does that look like? What does it mean? What is this place? So I remember going to Jean-Georges at the Trump Tower, getting a glimpse of Chef Jean-Georges as he came out, perfect pressed apron, crisp hair, Prada loafers. This guy's a gladiator. Like, look at this guy. Holy shit. He's a 4-star chef in New York. That's what it looks like, Just to be in the room with that guy. Wow. Eat his food, try to understand it. I have no idea I have no idea how this got to me. I'm often jealous of other forms of art that get to make something and it's done. And the flip side of that is what they don't get to do is tweak it the next night. Yeah. Like if I was a little unhappy with something, I can go back in tomorrow and like, you know what, that thing we did last night, why don't we try it like this? It's human nature. Like everyone is being made pretty much by hand, and sometimes it's a little different. You have to just make peace with it.
As you're wrapping up school, you end up getting to intern with Batali.
School tasks you with the responsibility of finding something. It's like, go get yourself an internship, kind of. New York Magazine had come out recently with a ranking of what they thought were the best restaurants in New York. So I think I took the top 40 and I wrote a letter to all of them asking for an internship. I don't remember getting that many back, but I saved them. I had them somewhere from Jean-Georges, from Danielle, which were a lot of them were thank you, no thank yous. And then finally, someone from Mario's restaurant called at Babbo, which had just opened. And it had just opened in a very significant way. It was winning all the awards, and it was sort of changing a bit of the dynamic of Italian food in America. And they called me in for a trial, and I got the job. I was their first intern. I remember going to Babbo right before I started working there. It had just gotten a 3-star review. It had just gotten best new restaurant in the country. And he was playing Licensed to Ill cover to cover. And my mind was blown. Like, it was this fancy restaurant playing Beastie Boys cover to cover, really loud, making his version of Italian food. It just changed my perspective on this industry. I couldn't believe this place existed. It was crazy to me. And that started the next chapter, which was like legit kitchen. Now you're not at the Crab Shack anymore, you're not in school anymore, you're in a real kitchen with real pros. The most important idea I've ever had. There are no impossible moments. I have the ability to manipulate anything in my favor. If I put the time and effort, I can will it there. and that nothing is off the table.
Now fully committed to his culinary path, Carbone was determined to do what it took to get to the next level. So he moved to Italy to learn more about his roots and the accompanying food, and brought those experiences with him when he later reconnected with classmate Teresi, as the two stepped into the unknown to launch something of their own. You start the internship. Shortly thereafter, you end up getting an opportunity to move to Italy.
Yeah.
How did that happen, and what did you learn while you were there?
I started to realize through working at these Italian restaurants that what I knew of Italian food was actually Italian American food. I wanted to know more about the origin of some of this. So I went to Mario and I asked if there was connections he could make, and he put me in contact with an author who lives in Rome. Her name's Faith Willinger, and Faith gave me a few options of where she thought I might be comfortable.
These are just restaurants that she knew of?
Yeah, they were restaurants that she knew of and families that she knew that ran the restaurants. And I wound up just kind of cold choosing one, a restaurant called La Dogana, which is in northwestern Tuscany, a family and a restaurant that's still really close to me. Through the years, I've sent my staff to go train there, and they basically live in the room that I lived in, and they work at the restaurant I worked at, and they do my old job, and they get a little sense of where that comes from. Easily one of the most significant moments of my life is the year plus that I lived in Italy, middle of nowhere, really knowing English being spoken. It was, waking up in the morning and going with the chef to the fish market, meeting the guy who raises the pigs, meeting the person who makes the cheese, really starting to get a better understanding of the cycle of life and learning his box, right? Learning what they consider their food and understanding the rules there and understanding why those are somewhat important to adhere. And then it became a source of inspiration, and the idea of the box becoming this thematic set of rules became a mantra that I lived my whole life by, really.
Tell me a little bit about the box.
My mind works thematically very much inside a box. Depending on the project or the topic or the conversation, maybe there's a set of rules that already exist. That's an amazing scenario. An example of that is us redoing the old Four Seasons restaurant. There's a set of innate rules there of what we're gonna build and how we're gonna build it, and a story that needs to be told because it's effectively a functioning museum. And sometimes I'll create a story so that story sets the box and sets the parameters. If we're saying that this restaurant is a homage to the first generation Italian Americans in New York, which is what Carbone is, then that wouldn't exist. But this and this would. So let's make sure that we're never diverting away from the story that we're telling. Because as soon as you do, you lose your audience. They're gone. It's very much theater. I'm aware that I have a different set of guests every night that come to these places, all looking for a similar experience. Tell the story, stick to the rules. And then I can train in that so that when a chef is working and I'm not there and he makes something, they'll know if it fits inside the box. Okay, that worked or didn't work for these reasons. Those reasons are the set rules. This is the original artwork that became the menu. We wanted to draw the restaurant as if it was 1958. We chose that year to manipulate the story, right? So then, what are the uniforms in 58? What's the portion size of the veal I would have got in 58? That song wouldn't have been playing, it's from 61, and now how serious are you gonna hold that box? Then all of a sudden the customer becomes an extra in your movie.
What is success?
The privilege to get to see your ideas play out in real life.
You had a 10-year career leading up to the opening of Teresi. What happened between graduating and those first internships and the time in Italy that sort of prepared you for opening your own places?
I tried not to focus too much on the cuisine, although I did try to make sure that I had a pretty rounded background. I did traditional French with Danielle. I did traditional Italian in Italy. I did a new style of this creative Italian here in New York. I did molecular gastronomy with Wiley Dufresne. I tried to make sure that I was a pretty well-rounded chef because I was always afraid of not having the answers later, of a young chef coming to me the way that I went to these great masters and not not being prepared, not having the answers. It's a fear of failing. How do you not succeed in your own city? You know, how do you not give New York something for all it's given you?
How did you know you were ready?
I don't think you get to know. I don't think you ever get to know. I think you get to a point where you've built up enough confidence in your experiences, but man, is it scary. I was working as like the second or third in command at Del Posto, which was at the time the fanciest Italian restaurant that New York had ever seen. And my parents went there and they got to eat there and they were so proud of this place. The day that I left, I told my mom and she was visibly upset. She really couldn't tell anyone anymore that I worked there or for that chef. And I remember getting that reaction and it burning me, because that meant you didn't think I could be better than that. And I know that she didn't mean that, but I used it as this fuel, like, wait till you see what I fucking do. You have no idea yet what I'm gonna do with this family name.
So what were the first sort of steps to getting from there to Risi opening?
We had hit this sort of 2008 recession.
Which was devastating for the industry.
Devastating for the industry, and certainly for young upstarts who have yet to prove their name as entrepreneurs. I don't have any money. I have all this experience. I think I can do something special. There's no one that's gonna give an unproven 29-year-old kid any money to open a restaurant right now. At the time, my roommate happened to be rich. He was working for somebody else and I was working for someone, and then we wound up, because neither one of us had any money, sharing a studio loft apartment on Waverly. And there was a moment of, if either one of us is going to never have another boss again, the only way to do this is if we do it together. Let's take the little bit of family money that you got on your side and the little bit of family money that I got on my side and a couple of friends who want to throw in, and let's find the tiniest little thing and let's just take a shot. And that's what we did. We had never considered it prior. We would have never considered it prior. You don't tag team chefs. We were so determined to be entrepreneurs and be our own bosses that we took that shot. And we opened a 400 square foot restaurant on Mulberry and Prince and rolled biggest set of dice we ever had. Because not only was it rolling the dice on succeeding or failing, it was both our blue collar families, all they had. And there were moments of uncertainty of whether we were gonna make it or not in those first few months and first year. It wasn't exactly going smoothly.
Things were pretty modest when you first opened the doors.
Selling sandwiches and sides of vegetables. I made one little lasagna every day. Rich made chicken cutlets. It was like cooking in grandma's kitchen. And then at night, because of the limitations that we had, we only had a chalkboard menu. We didn't have a big enough refrigerator to hold food. We didn't have enough staff we couldn't give out a menu. I couldn't afford to buy all those ingredients. What I could do was make one menu. I'll buy just this much fish tonight. I'll buy just this much this tonight. This is what I can do. And so through this chalkboard menu, we went hard on it. And we were like, all right, you know what? Let's change this menu every day. Through writing the menu every day, we found this rhythm of who we were as a team, he and I, and as chefs of New York. And then we started making beautiful, interesting, unique dishes that only could come from that moment in time. And we charged $45 for the whole menu, and you sat down and you had no choice. You just had to eat what we gave you. For a long time when we first did this, people would come in, they'd look for a menu, we'd say, this is what we're serving tonight, and they'd walk out. And that happened night after night after night. Or they heard we served sandwiches and they'd come at night and they'd be like, let me get one of those sandwiches. They're like, no, we only do that in the daytime. They're like, there's nobody here, just make me a sandwich. I was like, no, this is what we do at night. We're gonna do this. And it took a while until that got traction.
How does one go about getting the word out about a new restaurant?
When Rich and I worked together for Northern Blvd, a young Korean kid named David Chang showed up to work. Me and Rich were side by side and Dave worked behind us and we became friends. When Dave left, he said, I kind of had it doing fine dining. I'm gonna go open a noodle shop in the East Village. And Rich and I were like, this sounds like a terrible idea, Dave. Like, I don't think you should do this. And he's like, no, I'm gonna do it. He was like 26. So Rich and I would go and support him early on and eat at his restaurant. And
This is the noodle bar?
Yeah, this is the original noodle bar. He started to gain like this insane traction and it was hugely eye-opening for us to watch our friend become a guy. Like, whoa, people are talking about Dave and his noodles. Through him breaking down those barriers for an age generation of us, he was the first of us to get through. He's like calling from the other side. He's like, yo, I'm on the other side. This is crazy. You gotta come. Like, do your thing. You guys should do your thing. He called these journalists from New York Magazine, the Robs. I was like, go meet these guys. They're gonna go open a little sandwich shop in Mulberry Street. They met us and wrote a piece about us, and that was the first notoriety we got. And the next day there were people waiting outside to come in, and we had kind of made it. I think the harder you work, the better your luck gets. Luck's always that pixie dust, but it's the hard work that puts you in the place to receive the luck.
Shortly after opening Teresi, you meet the gentleman who would become your third partner.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, how did that happen?
So Jeff Zlaznik, he was in the food world. He went to school to be a banker and hated it. He had a food blog that was gaining traction, but he had the ambition of being a restaurateur. And not being a trained chef, he always knew that he was going to need to help. He was going to need to find people to do that with. And he was an early customer and a frequent customer of ours. And one night he was just like, he made a reservation. He was like, can you tell Mario I'd like to have a drink with him after work? We drank together for a few hours and we sort of professed our love and interest for the future of what we were doing. And we were both talking really about Carbone without knowing it. And when that seemed to line up, I went back to Rich and I was like, yo, this guy, I think he can help us, because we were just two chefs trying to figure out how to balance the checkbook and vendors, and we didn't know what we were figuring it out, and we would have figured it out, but he was gonna come on and be the other partner that we could really pass some of that on to. We're learning all collectively as we grow, how to run this as a business just really isn't something you can teach. You gotta just do it. And there's a lot of lumps that go into that. He felt like someone that could help us. We had no idea that what we were basically stumbling into was the perfect person for us.
Do you come into conflict often?
Yeah, every day. But we sort of have rules about that. And
yeah, I was gonna say, what are the rules?
There's three of us. So majority's gonna win, but also you can play a passion card. If you have supreme passion for this topic in this decision, you can win on one vote because the other two will acquiesce and say, you want to play passion on this? You got this? This is you? Yeah, I think it should be this. I believe it should be this. I think it has to be this. If the other two are somewhat ambivalent about it, take it. These are limited run plates that we have. This will only come out at the end, and all of your coffee sets and everything will match this.
Do all three partners weigh in on all of these sort of myopic details?
We do, and we've somehow find a rhythm to it all. We all appreciate it. We all want to spend the extra time, spend the extra money, spend the extra effort, and add all these things to it, which has just become part of how we build these ideas.
Once Teresi really started to take off and you have lines and people are making reservations and whatnot, how is the money starting to change for you guys?
We didn't see any money for a long time. There's not a lot of money in this. It's a funny business. It's incredibly difficult. It's super risky, and ultimately what defines success in this business is a very small number.
The life of a chef is notoriously brutal, from the hours, physical toll that it takes on you, and of course, leading up to ultimate success, money as well. Were there any points in your 20s where you just felt beat down or burnt out by all of that?
You get run down. It's a tough job. When I was a cook, there was real competition. You had to keep your job. You had to fight for your job if you're working at the highest level. You had to prove yourself. It was exhausting. Never doubt though, never was this not intended for me, I think. Never really was that in doubt through my 20s. It was always, I understand this is part of the journey. I understand this is the path. This is what'll make me great. This is really hard right now, and I think it should be. I think it's supposed to be. That's what I chose. When I feel anxious, it's a byproduct of being somewhat masochistic and wanting to put myself in that scenario for that feeling.
On the heels of their early successes, the major food group would further expand, building their empire atop another Italian concept, the aptly named Carbone. Soon, early goals of creating a new New York City classic evolved to worldwide restaurant openings as Carbone juggled his roles as chef, entrepreneur, teacher, and business partner. Take me through sort of the process of development from Teresi to Parm to then Carbone.
Parm was one of those things where like your neighbor goes out of business and things are going really well and you're like, all right, let's keep it rolling. Like, should we take that space? And that was just when Jeff got on board and we were like full of piss and vinegar and we're like, let's do more. That was just a growth off of Teresi. And then the real next big moment was when this space became available. This felt giant to us, you know, like Teresi was 16 seats and we walked in there and we were like, shit, this place is huge. You know, we inherited this kind of wonky space. And so where the back room was where the kitchen was, and there was like this tiny little hole in the floor with a spiral staircase that was like the only way to get up and down the stairs. There was like a weird private dining room that like felt somewhat shady. We weren't at the place in the company's life yet where we realized how much work that was. So then just enthusiasm pushed us through the other side, but it was a bigger undertaking than I think we knew at the time. It was the first time we were gonna hand out a menu. We don't have any menus. This thing was getting kind of fancier and fancier as we were building it out. And when you open a restaurant in New York back then, you get all the critics, they come right away. With the last one being the New York Times, being the biggest one, the one that I've read every Wednesday since I was a kid, that I wanted to be in since I'm a kid. I remember a real sentiment from journalists and sort of the public at large of, who do you think you are? Like, these kids who open this nice little sandwich shop, you're charging 50 something bucks for a veal parm and you're trying to make it real fancy and you got all these tablecloths and fancy china and like, don't you know Il Molino's down the block? That same critic who loved you here is gonna doubt you here. That was a mind fuck for us. We're like, wait, didn't you just say like all those nice things about us? Like, it's still us. That thing that we did there, I just applied to this here. You can't help but to have doubt creep in. Should I not be charging this? Should we not be doing it like this? And finally, we waited for the Times to come in and they wrote a just beautiful, glorious piece on the restaurant. And it was a huge exhale. We had a massive party. Like, everyone was so bought in on this thing that we were all just waiting for the Times to come and tell us we were worthy and make this Italian-American thing legit. From that moment on, I think a lot of the naysayers started to fall back and we were able to just kind of be in our space. You know, the clubhouse thing that followed, I really wouldn't have guessed. I've never been a part of anything that consistently does the same number of customers every single night, no matter what's going on in the world. It's really pretty unbelievable.
How do you process criticism?
Poorly. I've yet to really meet anyone that puts themselves out there in any sort of significant way with something that they've created that absorbs criticism well.
With Carbone now a success, that's sort of the foundation of the major food group. How did you guys think about growing and creating new brands from there?
You start to think, whoa, I can make anything. Like, they're gonna love this. Like, I got a couple hits under my belt. Took lumps along the way. When you're going at that pace and you don't have the infrastructure of the team yet.
What kind of lumps?
Not being able to conjure up the same emotion because you didn't get every detail totally right, maybe. Even though the doors are staying open, you know you could have done that a little better. It proved over time to teach us about how we're gonna grow later. It didn't stop the growth, it taught us how to grow.
As you guys started to scale, how were you able to maintain integrity across the brands?
You're not. It's not gonna be the same as when We all worked in this little room and we did it ourselves. Initially, you gotta make peace with the fact that I'm not gonna touch every plate tonight. Those growth moments are really, really hard. Right now, somewhere in this city, there's a waiter I've never met delivering a dish of food that I probably created years ago, and I'm entrusting this person that I may never meet to speak about it and understand it and deliver it the way I want and represent what we do. At some point, you fall back on being the craftsman and you become the teacher. I'm part of the opening team and I go from restaurant opening in city to city. I believe that my best use now is as a consumer, is just put myself in the place of a consumer, be there, experience it, take notes, go over what my findings were with the team.
What is the process for coming up with these new brands, like say the grill?
Like that restaurant, I don't look as mine. I believe that we're just the custodian of that restaurant. That's a New York museum that happens to serve food. So when we had this huge responsibility of taking it over, I consumed everything I could about what that restaurant was, what it stood for, who ran it, how they went about it. I got every menu that was ever done there from every year, laid them all out. I looked for consistencies. I taught myself about the restaurants that were in that neighborhood and what they were doing. How do I put back the food or the spirit of this place without just tracing what was there? I wanted it to be the closest thing you could have to dining in the White House. I wanted this to be the highest end American experience. So I mandated in my rules of that restaurant that everything get made in America. And it all needs to be custom made for the space. I selected a muse. My muse was John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy had his 35th birthday in that room, and Jackie loved that restaurant so much she called it the cathedral. So when I started to make the plateware, custom plateware, I went to the White House and I asked them what was President Kennedy's presidential china look like. They said it actually never got finished. There's nothing in the china room for the Kennedys. I didn't want that to stop me, so I went to the company that would have made that china back then, and I asked if they had anything in their archives, and the answer was yes. Jackie had chosen a French piece of china made by Limoges. You can't use Limoges in the White House, it's made in France, but she loved it. She brought it to Lenox, the company that was making the White House china back then, that still makes china in the United States. They made a single rendering that never got finished. I took that rendering and I finalized it, I made it, I got it to the finish line. I had Lenox put on the bottom, they stamped their old brand, the brand that it would have looked like in 61, 62, and they wrote presidential service for the grill, New York, New York. I got everything but the presidential seal on it. I tried to do that for everything that they encountered along the way, because I felt such a huge responsibility to that room.
How do you think about sort of the aggregate of all of those decisions together?
I believe, whether it's true or not, I believe that if you inundate the customer with all of these textural decisions that you're making, and if you made them with a single perspective and story in mind, and you chose all of those things with that story in mind, whether they know it or not, they can't help but feel it and be part of it. This is our home, this is our little house, and pretty much everyone that works here has been here since day one.
How do you manage that?
You can't manage that. I think it's just a thing that manifests itself. They become a family. They've all bought into this idea that what they do, they all take insane pride in what they do. You know, it helps that it's consistently busy and that they make good money, but it's beyond that. It's way beyond that. This is all family to myself and to them.
What part of the job keeps you engaged and motivated?
Getting a chance to work with the amazing people that have found us. People of like mind that say, I want to work in that company. And then you find yourself in a room with these brilliant people and you're like, wow, today I can do something I couldn't do yesterday. Today I can do something I couldn't do last year. Today I can do something I couldn't do 10 years ago. The snowball of what we've built is the sum of these amazing parts. And holy shit, if I engage in all of these amazing parts and people that are around me now, we could do anything. Like, what would you like to do today? You know, and that amazing gift that's been given to us through the corner of hard work and luck.
What do you see as next for yourself and the Major Food Group?
I don't know. which is really exciting. We have lots of opportunities. I'm not interested in just opening 1,000 restaurants. At some point, that is going to be an uninteresting pursuit for me, and there's going to be diminishing returns for me personally. Even if the success is unclear, I think that it's important for us to continue, just like we started, putting ourselves in uncomfortable positions. And if we're only working in comfortable environments, the end is near.